Welcome back to the channel, my friends. Warhammer Man Studios. I'm Warhammer Man, and today we're talking about the greatest extinction level event since Warhammer Fantasy: The Old World. But before we do, this video is sponsored by CMO Games. More on that later. That's right, it appears we may have another extinction level event on our hands. And while the loss of Warhammer Fantasy: The Old World is still felt deep in the hearts of gamers today, this is probably a little less dramatic, but equally curious. And as we get into 10th edition, it's just around the corner, and Warhammer 40,000 turns another leaf. I'm honestly curious as to what the heck is going on with faction-dedicated terrain pieces. So essentially, the majority of the factions in Warhammer 40,000 have their own dedicated terrain pieces. So I'm here on the Games Workshop site, and we can see obviously we have some various terrain pieces, and it's rather curious because some of the faction terrain pieces have been around for multiple codexes. Some of them are brand new, some are readily available, and others are basically impossible to get. So if we look here, this is a perfect example of a brand new faction terrain piece. Now previously, Games Workshop sold an Aegis defense line, but it wasn't actually like a dedicated faction terrain piece like we're talking about here. This is the new Aegis defense line, and it's literally just a couple months old, and it is brand new in the Astra Militarum Imperial Guard Codex. So we know that faction terrain pieces are still a thing up until the very end of 9th edition. Now, will they release the Aegis defense line at the end of 9th edition? It'll only be viable in game terms for a couple months, and then going into 10th edition, all the faction terrain pieces will be gone, and this will no longer be useful for anything other than just some scattered terrain. It's very well possible. We have seen Games Workshop create a product, market a product, sell a product, and then literally within weeks or months, that product be completely obsolete. So I wouldn't rule it out, but also it's not necessarily what I think is going to happen. So here we are back at the regular page, and here we can see one of the Tau faction terrain pieces. And this one is just as curious. This one is in and out of stock at times. It still says temporarily available online, so potentially going to come back in stock and be purchasable again. But this is actually one of 3 Tau terrain features. So there's the Tidewall shield line. There's also this Tidewall drone port, and this one is actually available and in stock. And then there's also one more. It's like the Tidewall gun port or something like that. And it has basically like a big railgun attached to it and like a little tower coming off of it. So strangely enough, the Tau actually have 3 of them. One is completely gone from the range. It's not even on the website anymore. One is out of stock and one is still in stock. So again, curious because it could sort of go either way on that. And then this is the Big Ed Boss Bunker, and this was brand new this edition. And this is obviously the dedicated orc terrain feature. And again, it says temporarily out of stock online, but it's not been removed from the site. It doesn't say no longer available, etc. Again, we see with the Convergence of Dominion, the Necron terrain piece, the Hammerfall Bunker. This one is relatively new as well. That's our Space Marine terrain piece. And just scrolling down, there's a couple more. The Necrolith Crown for Chaos, the Miasmic Malignifer for Death Guard, the Webway Gate for Eldari and Drukhari, Feculent Gnarlmaw for Chaos Demons, etc. And the list goes on. But the truth is, I wouldn't be that worried about the terrain pieces going away, except for I know that terrain is heavy, it takes up a lot of space, and Games Workshop in general does not like having big piles of terrain sitting around waiting to sell. But before you dismiss what we're talking about here and just assume that some of the stuff's out of stock and they're just a little bit busy cranking out as many Leviathan sets as they possibly can while also releasing all of their other stuff, don't get too comfortable because we just saw something happen that really sparked the idea of this video. So we're going to jump over here and take a look at the Battle Sanctum. And the Battle Sanctum is no longer available on Games Workshop's website. And this is a really cool faction terrain piece for the Adeptus Sororitas. It's only been around for a couple years. I'm pretty sure it came out at the end of last edition, early into this edition. And it's basically just a big old building with some really cool, unique sprues in it for like the big wide wall pieces right here. Also for this little second level extension piece. And then of course the actual Celestine statue itself. And then there's some other recycled sprues in here also. But this is a really cool setup. And honestly, we've never seen this wide wall or some of these other bits offered in different sets. So not only was this a cool terrain piece for the actual game, just to play on, it was also a really cool faction terrain piece and had some cool special rules and everything. but also it provided for people that like to build custom stuff or big cities or whatever, a bunch of extra pieces to build onto your sets with. And now this thing is basically gone from planet Earth. It's almost impossible to get. They're no longer available from Games Workshop. It's not even listed in the store. And basically any stock or supply has been bought up. And if it was just one piece, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I would say maybe they're repackaging it. It's going to come back or something like that. But we actually saw something similar happen not long before that. And it is important to note also that this piece is still available in the codex. So you can actually purchase it in game terms, but you can't actually buy a model for it, which in general is something that Games Workshop has said that they're not going to do in the future. If it's in the book, it's going to be available for sale. If it's an option in the actual rules, you'll be able to buy it from them. And we know that over time, they've slowly been moving more and more towards this, but this feels like a big step in the wrong direction. So maybe I'm overreacting and this is going to come back, but I have a feeling I'm not. So again, here we have another faction terrain piece, and this one is the tectonic frag drill. And this thing has been gone for years. It was removed from Games Workshop web store over a year ago, almost a couple, and it's basically, again, impossible to get. This is the same type of situation with the Battle Sanctum for the Gene Stealer Cult. It still has rules in the codex. It has a bunch of sprues in the set that are available in other sets as well, but it also has some completely custom stuff, like the actual drill itself and the mounts and everything like that. So once again, this terrain piece went out of Games Workshop store literally over a year ago, probably a couple of years at this point in time, and is basically impossible to get. And yet somehow it's still in the books. It still has rules and potential use in game terms. So very, very strange, because we see essentially some consistencies with the inconsistencies. So just sort of jumping back over to Games Workshop's web store, I'm not sure specifically if some of these are going to be going away. I'm not sure if like the Tidewall Gunport or whatever it's called is already kind of made that trek, and that the other pieces are on the way too once they sell out. But a lot of this stuff is pretty new, like the Convergence of Dominion, the Hammerfall Bunker, the Miasmic Malignifer, etc. Now granted, it's not like in Sigmar. If you're only a Sigmar player and you don't play 40k, in Age of Sigmar, you basically get to take your terrain piece for free, and it provides some pretty cool effects. So there's no reason not to have one for every single army, because you basically get to put it in there, you get some cool effects from it, and it's completely free. It also makes the board look cool because it essentially matches your army. In Warhammer 40,000, you still have to pay points for them. Most of them are pretty bad. Some are okay, but they vary a ton. Some of them are pretty cheap and don't do a lot. Others are a little on the expensive side and are actually like strong offensive capabilities, something like the Hammerfall Bunker. Now a quick message from today's sponsor. CMO Games has been selling Games Workshop products online for over 20 years. They carry the full line of Games Workshop products, including Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda, Blood Bowl, paint tools, and more. Almost all Games Workshop products are priced at 15% off MSRP. CMO Games takes pre-orders for most Games Workshop products released at their earliest date possible. 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, they go live. Most of these pre-order products are also priced at 15% off MSRP. CMO Games offer free shipping in the US 48 with an order of $50 or more. Their customer service is top-notch, and they ship most orders within 24 hours. Visit CMOGames.com using the affiliate link in the description and let them know that you heard about CMO Games from Warhammer Man. Now back to the video. So the question is, what's up with these inconsistencies? If Games Workshop is getting ready to get rid of faction terrain pieces for Warhammer 40,000, why did they just release this super cool Aegis defense line? If they're not getting rid of the faction terrain pieces, why can't you buy the Battle Sanctum or the Tectonic Frag Drill anymore? And the answer is, I have no idea why there's so many inconsistencies. I have no idea if Games Workshop is going to be eliminating these pieces, or if it's just a matter of time before they start reproducing them. I would imagine from a business standpoint, once they've spent like tens of thousands of dollars on the actual molds, that eventually it makes sense for them to do another run of these terrain pieces. But honestly, I don't know. I would have said after a year or two that the Tectonic Frag Drill would do something similar, and that's just not what's happened. And now as we see some of these other terrain pieces disappear, like some of the Tau pieces, and now the Adeptus Sororitas terrain piece as well, it just makes me think, if these things are going to go away, are there any of them that I want to get before they do? Because the truth is, once they're gone, unless you're willing to pay an extra $200 or $300 over MSRP, it's going to be basically impossible to get them. So I don't know. Are we looking at a terrain extinction level event? Maybe. But it doesn't make much sense for Games Workshop to have a bunch of stuff they could be making and not make it. And it definitely doesn't make sense for Games Workshop to keep the rules in the books if you can't even get the terrain pieces anymore. So I guess we'll see in a couple of months when they release all the new rules for 10th edition if the faction terrain pieces are still a thing. Maybe they'll be gone initially and then they'll show back up in the codexes later on, and Games Workshop will remake the ones that are out of stock. But honestly, I don't know. But it is worth paying attention to. And if you're in a situation where you really like one of these terrain pieces, especially one of the older ones that there's not a ton of floating around, might not be a bad idea to pick them up just in case. So let me know what you think down below. Always like to hear your guys' opinions. Definitely curious to see some of these terrain pieces that are still in the codexes disappearing. And while I don't want to start sounding the alarm too soon, the fact that the Battle Sanctum just disappeared is definitely worth note. Special thanks to CMO Games for sponsoring the video. Check them out to save 15%, link in the description. That's it for today. Warhammer Man Studios, I'm Warhammer Man, and I really hope the faction terrain pieces don't go the way of the old world. And I'm out of here.